Yeah.
All right, I'll go ahead and start. We will have a few people walk in on us in a bit, but that's fine. So thanks for coming. Welcome. April meeting of the Committee on the Environment. For those who I think you all know me at this point, I'm Dustin. I'm the director. For those on Zoom who don't know me, been here since September. I was volunteered slash voluntold to do quarter two for this, and so basically, if you don't know the way that we have broken it down this year, and hopefully the years going forward, is every quarter. So for 3 month periods we are going to be covering one of the different principles from the AIA framework for design excellence, and we're going to try to relate those to the environment. And we are trying to partner with local businesses and nonprofits and people in town who can relate to that. So my topic is essentially urban infrastructure. It is the principle for equitable communities, and it's featuring local nonprofit Yes Knoxville. If you're unfamiliar with the framework, I found this cute little graphic. It shows basically the 10 different principles. The framework is essentially, you can see in the bold, they describe it as it is a thing to inform progress towards a carbon zero, equitable, resilient, and healthy built environment. Again, I will be discussing design for equitable communities. Each of these has different bullet points that are either questions or statements to essentially help architects understand what are the issues over the next century that we need to be tackling as a society. And so, for me, as a non architect that is eternally chained to architects, is my lot in life. Not complaining, it's just I'm always around architects. And so what I gathered from it was essentially these 3 points, which is how can we create human scaled, human focused places? How can we do this in a way that is just making sure everybody's treated equally? And essentially, what's the bigger picture outside of just the architecture of the building? And then for the purposes of this meeting, how does this connect to sustainability? So again, Yes Knoxville is here. I am also the executive director of Yes Knoxville. So I am the one representing the nonprofit. I founded Yes Knoxville back in 2023 before I came on the AIA. And essentially, we are an advocacy and an education nonprofit about urban planning and zoning issues and how those connect to everybody's daily lives. Hey, hey, have a seat. We've got 3 seats. It's perfect. Um, and so we, at the end of the day, are pushing for more choice and more freedom in the areas of housing, transportation, and public space. The way we do that, again, is through reforming our current codes and our current zoning and educating people on the structural barriers that keep us from kind of building a more equitable city, a more sustainable city for everybody. And so we'll get into later on how we can how you all specifically as architects can advocate for these things. But first, we have to go over our present reality, which is that this is not a hoax, despite what people say. Climate change is a very real, very present, very escalating danger. We know from ice core samples, tree ring samples, a host of things that we can backtrack up to 800,000 plus years that the CO2 levels in the atmosphere are dangerously high. And it's not just that they're high, it's that they have gone up basically in correlation with the start of the Industrial Revolution. We do know that the planet ebbs and flows with how much carbon is in the atmosphere. That's part of the natural process, but the fact that it has increased so dramatically in just the last 150 years can be directly correlated with the human causes of spewing greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. We know this; it is not up for debate. Something like 98.5% of all climate scientists agree with this, which, as I often tell people, if you thought you had cancer and went to 100 doctors and 98 of them said you had cancer, you would not think the cancer was right. We know this is real. 22%. I think they're paid by fossil fuel companies. I honestly think that's what's happening. This is something that I've fallen in love with. So a lot of people, a lot of humans don't really, not even understand, but aren't necessarily motivated or moved emotionally by graphs like this. And so this professor, I think it was at the University of Reading in the UK, created this. It's called the climate stripes. And each of these individual bars represents a year. And the lighter color, the blue, means it is a lower than average temperature compared to the average from 1850 to 1900, which is the average we use because it was the last 50-year decade before the Industrial Revolution really took off. And the more beige and red it is, the higher the temperature is. And so you can see that the last 20 to 30 years, roughly our entire lives, for those of us in this room, things have not been looking great. And so we need to. I'm very sorry for what I'm about to share with you. It's going to be very depressing, but we have to acknowledge the reality if we understand what we're going to go through, and we have to acknowledge the severity of what we're facing because it's not talked about enough. There's a really good website that I highly recommend everyone look into called Climate Action Tracker, and it basically tracks every global policy that every nation has, their commitments to reduce emissions. And based on this, I think is from 2020, yeah, December 2023. With current policies, we are projected by the end of this century, which when you often doesn't feel like it's that close, but then, and I'll talk about this in a bit, I'm reminded that I have cousins who have kids now, and they will be in their 80s in 2100. So this will affect people we know. We are projected to be somewhere between 2.2 and 3.4 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels. And since we're American, what that means is each degree Celsius is about 1.8 degrees Fahrenheit. Okay. So we're looking at 6 to 7 degrees higher. So what does that mean? So 3 degrees Celsius, for example, most of the Himalayan glaciers will be lost. 4 degrees, you're looking at severe and extreme droughts. 4 degrees, 3 to 4 degrees Celsius, you're looking at, for example, a 50-year heat wave event is between 25 and 40 times more likely to occur. A 10-year heat wave is 8 to 10 times more likely. Things radically in their severity as we reach this. You're going to see just in the Mediterranean area, 97% increase in areas burned by wildfires at 3 degrees. You're going to see the average length of drought go from 2 months if it's 1.5 degrees above to 10 months if it's 3 degrees above. Somewhere between 2 degrees and 4.5 degrees above pre-industrial average, you're going to see between 8% and 41% of mammals losing half their habitat. You are going to see one more for me. You're going to see complete collapse of marine ecosystems. We will no longer have coral reefs. You're going to see fish species go extinct locally. You're going to see a lot of food insecurity. This is not something that is just going to affect birds and trees and animals, but because of its impact on food production, it's going to lead to mass migration. We're looking at potentially 170 million people being displaced, climate refugees across the world. Again, this is very, very, very serious stuff. Near complete melting of Greenland, sea level rise at 7 meters, which if you want to know what that looks like practically, I found this really compelling rendering of the National Mall in DC. This this is what 3 degrees warming would look like. This is what Washington DC would look like on a normal day, and this is what we are projected to have at the end of this century if we don't change. And Knoxville's affected too. We're not immune. So I moved here in 2008, which is basically when this chart starts in the red section, and the average daily maximum temperature was about 70 degrees Fahrenheit. Into the century, it's going to be closer to 80. So even locally, we're going to see about a 10-degree increase in average temperatures. Going back to what I was saying earlier, this affects every single person in this room and our children and the children of our friends and family. I was born in 1990, so right about here. And what this is saying is by the time I will be 70 years old, we are currently on the height of very high emissions um, projection. And so we're going to have, again, that 3.5 to 4 degrees warming. But my cousin, who was born in 2020, when she's 70, she's going to have a much, much worse world. So this is something that we know we need to act on and need to act on swiftly because it will affect not just us, but those that we love. So at the end of the day, for me, what the problem is and the solution, at least half of it, is land use. And this is where, yes, Knoxville comes in and where you all's architects come in. So if you look at U.S. greenhouse gas emissions sources, this is from 2022. A lot of people don't realize transportation is actually the biggest sector when it comes to emissions, obviously, because we live in a car-dependent society. Residential and commercial buildings are 13%, agriculture is 10%. If you add just those three sections up, because to me, and for the purpose of this meeting, that is the kind of land use we'll talk about, because that is what zoning directly can impact. That's 51% of emissions. So literally slightly over half of emissions are controlled by the zoning policies that control how we get around, how much land we get to farms versus homes, how much homes are on a plot of land. Um, as an example, within transportation, cars and vans nationally are 48% of emissions. What I find interesting is, again, if you look at the US, transportation is only 28% of emissions, but this is from our sustainability guide from 2021 in Knoxville. Here locally, it's 59%. We're a very suburban city. Most people drive, and you can see that it's on-road gasoline, so mainly personal vehicles that are causing those emissions. Again, from the sustainability work one, you'll notice kind of a glaring larger section that is transportation, and it went up. There are a few little sections that went up, but overall, transportation is something that we've really been kicking the pooch on. And so, why do we have these emissions from transportation, and what does zoning and land use have to do as well? At the end of the day, it comes down to the fact that for the last 80 years, we have been sold this story that to be good Americans, we need to have a large yard and a large house in the suburbs, and we have to drive it. And that is what we've been told the American dream is. We've been told that to live in a place like this, in a place where the buildings are homogeneous and there is no mix of uses and everything is just a single family home with a yard, is the way to prosperity. And what we have seen over the decades is not only has that led to environmental degradation, but it's led to societal decay, and it has led to a collapse in people being able to be upwardly mobile. There have been a lot of problems with this. And the reason that this has continued to occur is because, again, of zoning. The New York Times did this fascinating study a few years ago. Most people don't realize this, but in the standard US city, about 80 some, I think it's 85 is the average percent of land is dedicated just to a detached single family house. That is all you are legally allowed to build in about 85% of our cities. If you want to build even a duplex, you will be told you are a communist, go away, you do not like America, get out of here, do not collect $200 or pass go. And it's the same here in Knoxville. So this is from our planning map. I know that the colors are fairly similar, so it might be hard to tell. Apologies if anyone is colorblind. But this light green is more kind of open space agricultural, but this light yellow is only single family zoning. You can only build a detached single family house. Again, it's something like 82 or 85% of our city. Legally, you can only build a detached single family house. And so, one of the ways that we as citizens and you as architects can help change this is to let people live closer to each other. That's the first solution. We have to let more people live near each other. The second problem is that, as I've said, we live in a society where we feel entitled to be able to park directly where we're going, right next to it. We've forgotten that God has given us two legs, and that for most of us, we have the ability to walk, and it is not a burden. And so we have not only decided that this is something we are entitled to, but we have made it so that it is enshrined in our law. A lot of people, you all as architects will know this, but there are parking requirements for every new development or redevelopment. And so when you have this, there's a vicious cycle where you build spaces for cars, not people, which forces people to drive, which then makes people think that people want to drive, which then keeps these laws in place. And it doesn't just affect us in terms of the environmental cost or the cost of space. It directly contributes to the housing crisis. Again, as you all will know as designers and architects, any money spent on a parking space, especially if there is a garage associated with it, that is space and money spent not going towards housing. So every again, for example, in this, it says for a 100-unit development, a parking mandate would require 40 parking spaces, which on average would be 33 fewer units of housing. The way to get out of the housing crisis and the homelessness crisis in part is to build more housing, which in part means that we have to stop creating a system that forces the use of the vehicle. That's solution number two. And then finally, We do not have places near where we live where we want to go and just exist, where we can do so without the use of a car. There is this concept that you all may or may not be aware of. It's referred to as a third space. The idea being first space. Your first space is your home. Your second space is where you work. In my case, and many people, that's the same space now in a post-COVID world. And the third space is a space where you can go and just exist. And we do have spaces like that are somewhat third spaces, but they're not quite third spaces because at the end of the day, they are privately owned and they have hours of operation. So they're not truly a third space because if I decide I want to go hang out with my friends at the mall and it's 9:10 and they close at 9:30, I only have 20 minutes to be there. That's not a true third space. If I go to West Town Mall and have a little too many mimosas at the Cheesecake Factory, they can ban me from West Town Mall. They can't really ban me from Market Square, right? If they do, I'm in prison, but it's a different type of banning, right? And so the thing is, we need to create more third spaces. And the thing about third spaces, the beautiful thing about third spaces is that they do not have to be big. They can be something very small, and they can also be something that is not even permanent. Third spaces are mostly places where there are no cars. It is a place, again, that is human focused and is human centered, is a place where people can exist without the threat of violence from a car and also without the demand of being a consumer. These are places where we are allowed to just exist as humans and build community. And so solution three is that we need to give people third spaces near their homes. Okay. So why does all this matter, again, in terms of our purposes specifically? Well, we've got more than enough data now to show that people who live closer to each other, people who have ways to get around that are not the personal vehicle, and people that have places where they can build community emit less carbon. The green on here is less carbon emission. Denser places are greener places. We know this. This is true. The greenest places are not suburbia. They are not rural places. They are dense cities. If you want to get rid of carbon emissions and help fight climate change, you have to help construct a place. And that doesn't mean the city has to be big. It doesn't mean it has to be a New York of 8 million people, but it means that you have to create a system in which people live closer together, have the freedom to get around in a manner other than a car, and have places to go to build community. So some of the ways that, yes, Knoxville is doing this is that we currently have 5 different campaigns going on. I'll hit on 3 of them here. So in terms of moving people closer together, we have our home campaign, which is helping our missing middle expand. And what this is doing is essentially saying right now, in I think any zone except maybe RN1, you're allowed to build a duplex, but you have to get special approval. What this is doing is trying to change our codes to allow it by right so that no neighborhood can prevent a duplex from being built. Because if every plot of land in our city could allow a duplex, that immediately doubles the potential of housing in the city, which will not only help the housing crisis, but help the climate crisis. It's a very little way to change our city codes to allow more housing, to allow people to live closer together, which will obviously then go and help to expand the potential of public transportation. Because the more density you have, the better public transit works. In terms of the transportation issue specifically, we have our BUILD campaign, which stands for Better Utilization of Land Development, and that is essentially seeking to get the city whole scale to end parking. We are saying that, if you truly understand the nature of a project, it should be up to the architect and the developer and the client and the neighborhood to say, can we get away with 5 on-site parking spaces because there's an empty street next to us? It's next to a bus line. We have to provide 50 parking spaces? Absolutely not, because if you look at the history of parking requirements, they are 100% out of someone's ass. They are totally arbitrary. One of my favorite things, there's a really good nonprofit out of Seattle called the Parking Reform Network. I highly recommend you look into. And their founder, Jordan, I can't think of the last name right now, but their founder, Jordan, brings up the absurdity of parking requirements in 2 ways. One, he says you have a requirement for parking at a bar, which, if you actually think about it, is absurd. That somewhere where people are going to get completely trashed requires somewhere to park a personal vehicle. Okay. The second thing he brings up is that these parking requirements differ city by city. I had Jordan speak to. I'm on the transit authority for the bus system here, and I had him speak at one of our meetings last year. And he did some research into local codes and brought up the fact that if you just compare Knoxville to Maryville, okay, so say you're building, I think the example he gave was a bowling alley. If you're designing a bowling alley in Knoxville, you might be required to provide two parking spaces per bowling lane in Knoxville, but in Maryville, it might be one parking space per bowler. It's 100% arbitrary. There is no rhyme or reason to it. He said one of his favorites is to look at the differences in funeral home parking requirements because in all of his research, it will range anywhere from a certain amount of spaces per mortician to per casket provided to per mourner expected. Like these are all arbitrary, and all they do is force us to build a society which is car dependent, which expands emissions, which also makes it harder to build the housing we need. It's all connected. Okay. And then the last thing is that we have our place campaign, which stands for pedestrian linkages and commons expansion. And that again is trying to say we need to update our zoning and our codes to allow more pedestrian streets, pedestrian plazas, more third spaces in places all throughout town. I'm a big proponent. I live in North Knoxville, just north of Emory Place. I would love for that to just be a public plaza, no parking, right? A place to build community. I'm a big proponent that everyone in every neighborhood in the city deserves their own mini market square, right? And I think most people would agree. And so if we create places like that, places where people know this is where I can go and just hang out and be, um, that means that they are less likely to emit carbon by driving or by moving somewhere else across town to get the community that they seek. We know we are in a crisis of community right now. The American Psychiatric Association, I think last year, released a finding that something like 35% of Americans say that they're lonely every day. We know that the way out of this crisis is to build community, be around people. Um, so how do you personally advocate for these changes as architects? Here are just some things you can do. Call and write to city council. It doesn't have to be anything specific. You can literally just say, hey, I have these concerns as a local architect. I think we should not have parking requirements. I think we should have more pedestrian spaces, whatever. We have a city council that, regardless of where they stand on the issues, I have found that they are all very open to listening and they're very open to hear feedback. And something that a lot of people don't realize is most of the time when elected officials get an email or a call, it is people reacting in a negative way to something. So whenever we can send them notifications saying, hey, here's an idea, and also, hey, thanks for serving, thanks for when we can take a positive attitude. And I've had city council members tell me this that those calls and emails stand out because they are used to just being berated and told they're terrible people. So when we can come to them proactively and say, these are our concerns, I would appreciate it if you tried to help us figure out these solutions, they're going to listen. Show up to planning and council meetings when an important agenda item is up. Speak to that. It matters a lot more to see someone and hear them speak than even calling or emailing them. What I have found, because I'm the vice president at Old North, is to get involved in your neighborhood organization because too often a lot of neighborhood organizations, similar to some of these other commissions, are often um, the involvement is often headed by folks who are, and studies have shown this, are whiter, wealthier, and older than the average population. And so if we want our concerns and our voices to be heard, if we truly believe in equitable communities, we have to, as 20 and 30 somethings, get involved now. And so I highly recommend everybody get involved with your neighborhood organization, find out when the meetings are, go to them. If there is an opening on the neighborhood board, be on it. Apply to city and county commissions. The whole reason I am on the transportation authority is because a few years ago I said I want to find a way to get more involved in my community. The city has a portion of their website that shows you when there are openings on the various committees. I literally emailed the city for like 12 different openings. And then every 3 months after, I bothered, said, is this open? I would love to serve. And I think what happened is I annoyed them so much eventually this opening happened and they just said, put him on something there. He's bothering the hell. So if you bother them enough, they will listen. Okay. So apply to those. Talk about these things at your firms. Make sure that, if you are either whether you are or not in a leadership position at your firm, make sure those in charge at your firm know that this is important to you. Know that as architects, you do have an intimate role to play. I often tell people who are in a professional situation, so mainly architects, doctors, lawyers, engineers, there is weight behind that. There is weight behind saying you are an architect. Swing that chain, right? Swing that chain hard, use it. Like you worked your asses off to go through school to get your credentials, or maybe you're working on them now. Don't be humble about it. Say, I'm a local architect. I know about buildings. I know about cities. Like, we need to move in these directions. Okay. And then obviously, lastly, I have to plug my nonprofit, Join Yes Knoxville. I've provided some information for you all here. We would love for you all to get involved because obviously we are an organization that believes in the collective. And so the more people we have behind us, the more power we have when we speak to issues at Planning Commission and the City Council to say, hey, we have these people behind us that agree with our mission statement. And some of them are local architects that design the buildings, right? So it's not just a bunch of random schlubs. It's professionals in the area. And then if you're free tonight, we actually are having an event. Normally, you may know AIA has done this thing called Design Slam. AIA had temporarily, we decided for various reasons to not do it this year. So I talked to the executive committee and said, can my nonprofit do it? Because I know it's important to the design community. We don't want to lose momentum. They graciously agreed. And so, yes, Knoxville tonight at Alliance on Sevier is going to be having Design Slam. I won't go into the details, but we will be having teams design one of two potential locations in South Knoxville with a focus on public space and housing. And it should be really fun. We've got 5 different judges, including Karen Adams, who's running for South Knoxville City Council, Tricia Stuth, who's a UTK architecture professor. So it should be a fun time. I would love for y'all to come join us. And again, if there's ever any questions you have or any zoning issues that you want to work through or walk through, this is why I created Yes Knoxville. And it is something that because we didn't have an organization that focused specifically on urban planning issues in town, I said, well, guess I got to do it. So we're here. We're happy to be here, and obviously wearing the hat of both Yes Knoxville and AIA. I obviously have a passion to make sure that our organizations can partner together as much as possible. So that's all I've got. It's only half an hour. That's great. So I guess yeah, Q&A time. If any of you all on Zoom have any questions, I will minimize this, and I will pop open my video. But yeah, let me know if y'all have any questions.
I have one.
Okay.
But it's more for you than about, I guess. So some of us took this Leadership Knoxville introduction class last year.
Okay.
Intro Knox. And we had a breakaway session one day where we all had to decide like things that the city
Okay.
talk about. And these are people all over Knoxville, not just downtown area, but almost everyone's group, at least in our class, suggested kind of similar to your idea, like mini market squares in every neighborhood.
Oh, great.
And so I guess my question or my comment is that if you haven't connected with that organization, it might be awesome to get the word about Yes Knoxville out, and I can totally get you there.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Because Leadership Knoxville does even more that I'm not aware of, but they spend like a whole semester, I think, focusing on one topic.
Oh,
so,
okay.
Yeah, and it's like not just architects, it's like bankers, real estate professionals, teachers, like people all over the city. So
yeah, put me in touch. We definitely want to make us, especially as a new nonprofit, make as many connections as we can and let people know that we're here to assist them.
Yeah, when I heard that, I was like, wait, I've heard this idea before.
Yeah, one of the things that has recently been on my heart because I had the opportunity to go last year for a few weeks to Paris around the time of the Olympics, and so I got to see them um, basically radically change their city for pedestrians because their mayor has been very, very good about that. And one of the things they've done that I think we could adapt here Again, not a one-to-one, very different situations, but one of the things that they've done is basically they've taken something like 200 streets that are adjacent to schools and made them either totally pedestrian or they made it to where they have gated it and cars are only allowed for like loading and unloading children. So something like that, I think, again, different situations, but I think starting to talk about that, like what if we could take streets around elementary schools, or high schools, whatever level, and say, maybe, and it might be as simple as adding, I don't know if you know what a chicane is, but it's basically when a road kind of just jimmies away, you have like a little bump out to force cars to slow. It might be something like that, or planting trees and bollards so that cars, when they do drive, slow, but maybe the street is shut down, from 7, 8, from what 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. or something, and it's a pedestrian plaza. I mean, so there are plenty of ways that you can bring about that, and again, not necessarily even make it a permanent change because I think, especially in America, at least, there's a lot of things that we're good about accepting rapid change on, and there are other things, mainly when it comes to car infrastructure, that we're not. And so, anytime that we can do a pilot program or do something where we say this is just temporary meaning either this is only going to last for the summer or the street's only going to be shut down, for 3 hours every day. That helps ease people a lot more into the change because it's less of a ripping the band-aid also. Similarly to how downtown, they recently installed the retractable bollards on Market Unit. I'm a big proponent of that. Like to me, there's no reason why we shouldn't be able to install retractable bollards, as a minimum on streets in front of every school. That way, if the school wants to have, an outdoor day or something, they can just pop them up. It's safe. The kids are protected from cars, but 99% of the time, if you need traffic or if there's an emergency, you can pop them down. Yeah. So I mean, there are plenty of ways to easily do things like creating pedestrian squares.
What are you all doing with as far as the advocating for the duplexes? I know that they are allowed by right in the traditional neighborhoods for missing middle, but in the areas which that's a bigger conversation, just anything missing middle being allowed in
The non-TDR.
In non-TDR areas, which is kind of one of the impetuses of the ADU competition last year was like those are allowed by right anywhere. But it's not, but there's a lot, and I could go into the segues with like, but there's this, and this that doesn't allow it. So what are you all doing right now with the advocate for that? Like, is it, or just go ahead, yeah.
Sure. So again, right now, we're still in, I don't want to call it the planning stage, but we're in the, I guess, gathering stage to try to get teams put together. The biggest thing that we've recently done is we created our first official booklet. So this is a draft. It's got stains and markups in it, but I'm hoping to pick up about 50 copies tonight for Divine Slam. But this is a digitally on issue for the website issue.
Yep.
A lot of okay.
A lot of portfolios.
I was gonna say it's mainly portfolio stuff, but it's on our issue page. Which if you go to our website, it's on the main page. There's a thing at the top that just says "click here for a publication." But this basically, we've broken this down into, we have 3 different sections. So we have 5 ideas for better housing. We have 5 ideas for better transportation, 5 ideas for better public space. Because again, it's 25 ideas for 2025. And then we have 5 ideas that are just kind of didn't fit into any of those categories. And then we have 5 big ideas for 20. So that's where we talk about things like ripping out James Parkway and daylighting First Street so we can have like a San Antonio River Walk. That's where we talk about like getting it to where every bus is at this 5-minute frequency. Big things for the next 25 years. But in the back, we talk about our campaigns. And the goal with this booklet specifically is we're going to mail a copy to every planning commissioner, every city councilor, everyone running for city council. Part of our goal as a nonprofit is to make sure that people who are either in power or seeking power know not only where we stand, but that there are already solutions to our climate crisis, our housing crisis, our traffic crisis, our whatever, our community crisis. And so that's the main thing we're doing right now. But at the end of the day, we are seeking people to essentially build up teams to support these campaigns so that we can start hopefully no later than the end of this year, because that's when the next city council elections are, to start in mass having meetings with city councilors, emailing planning commissioners, and saying, hey, this is not only what we as a nonprofit want, but again, saying we have a list of these individuals, these professionals in town who are on board with this, who support this. So the biggest way to get involved right now is to just get involved generally in the nonprofit. And again, that doesn't even mean financially getting involved. We're a big proponent of, we don't want money to stand in the way of getting involved because we're a grassroots organization. So like, if you are, Randy Boyd want to give us 50 million, we're not going to say no. But if you're me and can only get 5, we're happy to have it. You know what I mean? And so the biggest thing is just we have monthly social hours. We always do a First Friday event, typically at Jack's on the 100 block. Or I'm actually really excited. He's agreed to let us use his wall in June to artists. And so we are working, I've reached out, I'm trying to work with the Beck Cultural Center to do an entire display on Redline, how it's affected Knoxville and how we can from that. And the goal would be that would be up as the art display for all of June. So there are plenty of ways to get involved, but like with the duplex thing specifically, like with any of our campaigns, just, and it can be as simple as, again, going to that part of our website, emailing us and saying, hey, I support this, add me to your list of supporters.
Yeah, and I know that with missing middle, that honestly, I think the TDR is just where they're starting. I think the goal is to, like, this is like almost a pilot version, to your point of like not ripping the band-aid, or sorry, likely ripping the band-aid off.
Exactly.
They're starting there just to basically collect data as to how it's been. And I sit on the city's design review board, and we see a lot of duplexes. That's about as far as missing middle as it gets in those TDR areas that we've seen towards infill housing and in city or downtown. But I do know, like with Lindsay, Illinois, and others, there's been a lot of, well, we go from duplexes all the way to like quadplexes, but and of course townhouses.
Yeah.
But they're happening in those areas, so I think developers are seeing that, and not that I'm representing yes necessarily, but in the same spirit of the housing advancement. Like I try to say every review board, even if the project is a single family infill, I always will couple it with my comments is this would have been a great project to have been a duplex or to be whatever to be a more, could it be more? And if it's ever a project that is subsidized from the city, like the homemakers program and other things like that, and it's single family, I always take the chance to say, hey, this could have been this, this, and this, because at the moment I can't change it because it's already there, but like just to keep saying, be the kind of annoying voice to say over and over.
Well, one of the things I've found in my experience doing this so far is that there really is, there's less of one every day, thank God. But there is, and I'll just be frank, there is a big difference based on your age. Generationally, millennials and Gen Z, we are much more likely to be okay with multifamily. Baby boomers hate it. Statistically, we can prove this too. Statistically, we can prove this. We know there are multiple studies. Zillow, as an example, did a study, I think 2 years ago, multiple cities across the country. So something like 89 or 90% of millennials said, yeah, I want townhomes, I want quadplexes, I want these things in my neighborhood, because even if I don't live in one now, like it's just another form of housing. And what was surprising to me is, yes, there was technically a majority of baby boomers who agreed, but it was like 52%. Right. So again, going back to what I said earlier, and I'm just speaking factually, most of the people who are in charge often in things like the planning commission who make these decisions are older. And so respectfully, we have to share with them the fact that this city belongs to the present, not the past. I often remind people, because what you will hear is the biggest complaint of people or the biggest concern of people who do not want to see multifamily in their neighborhood is they use the excuse that it'll change the neighborhood character. That's dangerous for multiple reasons. One, and I'm not saying this is how people are using it now, but historically that has been a racist tactic. That was literally, we don't want to change the character of our neighborhood to allow Black people. Like that is factually documented. And again, I'm not saying that's what's happening now, but the reality is, when you only allow single family housing in a neighborhood, it keeps, especially because you are restricting supply, you are making neighborhoods only for the wealthy. And it is exclusionary. And when Black families have 1/10 of the wealth of white families in this country, you are de facto keeping out black families and brown families, right? And so what we have to do is go forward and say, hey, part of the reason that these neighborhoods were built like this in the past is because that's what people then wanted. What we know statistically that people want now, especially those of us who are the up and coming generations who are seeking to become homeowners. And also a thing is to remind people there's nothing wrong with renting. I'm always going to be a renter because I'm always going to have $400,000 of college loans. You know what I mean? Because millennial life. And so reminding people one that renters do not detract from the neighborhood. Right. Again, I'm vice president of my neighborhood organization. I often remind people that just because you have paid to buy a house doesn't mean you're more committed to a neighborhood, because in any given day you can sell your house and move. Right. Whereas we know for a fact that lower income folks often rent in the same place as long as their landlord doesn't kick them out for decades. Right. The person who lived in my house where I live now, before I lived there, my landlord said she was a great tenant. She was there for like 15 years. And then something happened and she had to move. Right. So one is reminding people that renters are an asset. It's just you have different preferences or you're in a different stage of life. But also part of the reason, for example, that say Fourth and Gill, Old North had these big grand Victorian houses, kids died at 12, so people had 8 kids back then, right? Literally, like that's why these houses are big, is you need more space. 45% of this county right now are single like me. Okay, our generation on average is having children like 15 years later. Families are smaller. We have to design this city for the people who live here now. Our argument at Yes Knoxville is we do believe in preserving the character of the neighborhoods, but the character of our neighborhoods is they are inclusive and affordable, and they always have been, and we are losing. And so if we want Knoxville to stay inclusive, to stay free, to stay open, to stay where you can build the American dream, we have to start building housing types that people now want. So reframing the conversation to that and getting excited about it and being like, oh man, I wish we had more duplexes here. That'd be so fun, is a good reminder to people who don't hear that argument that, oh, there are people who don't think that these are going to lower property values and are going to do all these things.
There's definitely research that shows that it does not lower property value.
Well, exactly.
I don't have it with me, but
Well, I mean, and the way I phrase it too is it's common sense, because it's like if someone in your neighborhood wants to build something to house more people, that means you're in a desirable place. Like that means that people want to be there. Like you should want more people to be there. It's and also reminding people though that like a lot of the home and property values now are not the true value. They're overinflated because we've restricted supply. And so if any value of anything decreases, it's not decreasing in a negative way, it's decreasing to a just and fair way. Because the example that I always use is just because I'm stupid and this helps me understand it better, is if you were a baker and you baked a dozen cookies and you were the only baker in town and everyone wanted a cookie, we charge whatever you wanted for that cookie, right? Absolutely. If I come in and I offer 12 more cookies to you and I charge 80% less, you're going to rethink what you're charging, because suddenly people are going to come to me. And then if you open a bakery and you bake 12 more, these cookies are going to decrease to their actual worth. The only reason your cookies are $80 a cookie is because you got the only damn cookies in the city. And housing is the same. And we treat housing like it was a commodity to make money off of, not a human right. And that's part of the problem, right? And so we've got to increase supply so that our generation has the same shot that previous generations did. And it's not just about our generation, because we've got data. Overwhelmingly, as baby boomers age, they want to downsize. They want to move to walk. Right? They want to be able to live in a place like a duplex and walk around. Right, exactly. And so this is not a narrative of saying like the young people are moving in, kick out the old. It is our preferences as a nation have changed, right? As boomers have aged, as millennials have grown up, like all of us collectively have started to realize that the suburban dream of the 1950s is not the dream we want, and that's okay, right? Because what matters is that our city is responding to the needs, the wants of the people who live here and are invested in this city in 2025, not an ideal of the people who were here in 1945, right?
got two things to add to the multifaceted things you all are already touching. And I don't know the sweet acronym that you could float into the bill and replace. But so I've lived in Oakwood, it's Lincoln Park, but Oakwood Lincoln Park, Citrus Forest Ridge for almost 11 years. And a decade from when I moved there to now, it's rapidly, wildly different. But to your point of renting, that is another piece that is easily stated that like renters absolutely are a demographic and a type of people in the housing cog. The problem are the landlords. So from what I've witnessed as a person living there for a decade, it isn't the people. My street has a doctor, has an architect, has a janitor, has a construction worker, has a teacher, it's everybody. But the rental units, you know which ones are the bad landlords, and they're the problems. And I know all the landlords. I know where to find them on PGIS. I know how to get a hold of them. They all live in an island home or wherever, and they don't take care of the property. So that's one big thing. And I'm saying this as a platform to be like, tooth that into some of the Knoxville. But that's one that I see. The other is back to transportation and walkability. It's cars, of course. We know cars are the issue, and that's another thing with design review where we always try to make new projects, new infill houses, use the alleys to actually occupy your home and not the streets. But if you drive down Chickamauga Avenue, which is a thoroughfare in front of Sharps Ridge, look left and right, everyone's parking on the sidewalks. There's nowhere to walk. My wife and I were driving on Atlantic the other day, and they just put in a new sidewalk, brand new sidewalk, and people are still parking on the damn sidewalks. A blind man that we know, our local blind man, had to walk in the street to get around a truck. And Geneva and I were driving, and she goes, if it wasn't us, someone could have just been barreling through not paying attention to him. So like another piece of the transportation cog is like even I spoke to this during missing middle. It's like, oh, we're trying to reduce parking minimums or maximums, minimums for the housing, which that's great. I agree with all that. But then I said, I know where people are going to park. They're going to park in the front yards. Sure. They're going to park on the sidewalks. They're going to park everywhere. So sorry, all I have to say, enforcement is a huge issue in Knoxville. So because I used to go to Lindsay, Illinois, with all my problems because she's in planning and I'm people, and I'm like, what do I do? And she's like, it's an enforcement issue, and there's so many things happening that have to be enforced. Yeah. So anyway, I'm sure you got a plethora of comment to that, but those are two. It's enforcement on both levels. Enforcement to the landlord to be good landlords, and enforcement to be like, hey, Mr. or Mrs., you can't park your car over a public sidewalk.
And in college got towed by doing that, so you could always just call the tow company.
Well, that's the thing. It's also back to like levels of the city. Like Oakwood Lincoln Park isn't the flashy neighborhood. It's for sure housing, so the city is less inclined to come there and tow cars when it's not worth the hills. So that's one other conversation.
Yeah.
Well, and to speak briefly on both of those things. So, I'll take your second first. So obviously, when and if we develop new neighborhoods, new subdivisions, and this is a whole different conversation because there's so many weird ass subdivision regulations, but we need to get back to a traditional, not even necessarily a street grid pattern, but we need to be able to let neighborhoods have alleys where people can park, because one of the biggest impediments to pedestrian safety is having a curb cut for a driveway.
It's the rear access.
Exactly. So you can still have parking at your home, but it should always be in the back. I've got this. It's not a theory, but I've got this thing that I've noticed and I'm big about preaching about, which is you can tell roughly over the last like 4 to 5 decades when Americans started to prioritize cars over people. Because if you look, we took everything that used to be public or semi-public space, so front yard and porch, we moved it to the back and privatized it. And we put the car house, right? And that's why all the houses are ugly as hell now, because they're designed for cars, not people. Yeah.
So, that same intro Knox class we took, they had this like know your neighbor like campaign that they were trying to do, and they said exactly the same thing, that like people don't know their neighbors anymore because they drive straight into their garage, get into their house through there. They sit on their back porch, so there's not that like camaraderie that there used to be of sitting on the front porch. Yeah, and it reduces safety in children because there's not as many adults that are looking out for them. And I don't know, there were lots of statistics about just like general happiness in
Yeah.
knowing your neighbor.
Well, one of the things we do, we have a social event every year. I think we try to do it twice a year, but it's typically in June in Old North is a porch crawl. And so you just can't do that in suburbia because it would be a back deck crawl and you wouldn't know it was happening because you'd walk by the house and you would have to be invited.
Gotta get to the fence first.
Yeah, you know, so like so the first time I ever knew it was happening was literally I was just taking a walk through the neighborhood, saw a bunch of people drinking margaritas on a porch, and I was like, I think I know some of these people. And so I started talking, they're like, yeah, this is the porch crawl, have a margarita. And I was like, well, of course, you know. I mean, as you're all intimately aware, the way we design buildings matters, but it's restricted by the way we design neighborhoods, right?
Yeah.
And then briefly, to your point about landlords is yes. I won't mention names in this meeting. We'll call him Billy Tuesday. He's a local landlord. If you know him, you know him. But we'll call him Billy Tuesday, and he's just a crap landlord. Like he owns. Basically, if you see a property that looks like garbage in town, it's them. They don't take care of it. I lived in Brookings for 2 years in one of their properties, and it was a historic, I think Romanesque is the style duplex on Luttrell, and it had the historic blue paint. It's across from the church where Native Maps is, if you all know that company, where Sean Bolin, or not Sean Bolin, where Open Door is. Yeah. I lived across the street from that church.
Okay.
And I emailed them multiple times, and I was like, hey, I will for free scrape off this paint, restore it to the historic blue, redo the porch because I had planned to live there until I could afford a home in the year 2085. And so I was like, I'm going to be here for a while. Okay. And they told me no. They said that I didn't own the outside. I wasn't renting the porch. I was only renting the interior. And they went as far to say multiple times that they told me that I was not allowed to hang up a flag, which wasn't hanging the Nazi flag, I can tell you that. It was the state of Tennessee, so I don't know what they were offended about. They told me I couldn't decorate for holidays because someone might be offended at the holidays I support. And my neighbor, who was also this landlord, told me a story about how a year or two before I moved in, one of his roommates had gone outside. There was this, what was clearly had been a flower bed because there were like the brick pavers, okay, had planted flowers. They made him rip them up because they said, you're not renting the outside. So not only do they not take care of their buildings, they don't give grown-ass adults the agency to make it a home, right? And so yes, I told that neighborhood many times, if you see a multifamily property in this neighborhood that looks like garbage, the multifamily is not the problem. It's the person that owns it who doesn't care.
Yeah.
That's the problem. And so part of it is, again, reshaping this narrative, making sure people understand. Because I had a lady in the neighborhood after I called this out in a neighborhood meeting, like a month later, she said, you know what, I thought about it. And you're right. This like one fourplex in the neighborhood that we're always ragging about, like it really is a beautiful building. And it's not a problem that it's multifamily. It's that the owner won't fix it up. It looks like crap. But that's not the fault of the renters, and that's not the fault of it being multifamily. So it's just, again, making people think about things in a different way because that we just exist in a society where we've been sold this. If it's for 50, 60, 80 years, if it's multifamily, it equals crimes and drug and low property values. It's just the opposite now. We know it's the opposite. We know it's the way forward to solve the climate crisis, to solve all these crises.
The same goes for taking the bus.
Exactly.
It was like
Yeah.
beautiful and it smelled great.
Like there are a couple things. Like
Yeah, go ahead.
I take the bus sometimes. I bike mostly. I live right over there. Bike in the kitchen, take care. But I'll take the bus sometimes in bad weather. I'll have to put her in a car seat. She loves it, and she gets to wave at people. And there's bus driver, anything like something's questionable. There's an interviewer, and then random tidbit that I admire. You might not know. The 1950 stream. Average home size 983 square feet. Average. People think this like grand home is like the 1950 stream. It's not small.
Yeah.
It is
And I could only afford. I was able to afford my home. It's a duplex. I rent it. It's awesome.
Yeah. Well, and again, going back to the fact that this is a multi-generational issue, for baby boomers, for example, as they're aging, if they are no longer wanting to or have the capacity to live in a detached house, how great would it be for them to be able to live in a duplex where one side is like one of their children? So if there is an issue, they're independent, but they're still near family. you know, or if they have, say they had kids later in life, they had a kid just now, or even Gen X, who are, you know, a lot of the parents of college students now, like rent one side of your kid, like, which is why our home campaign is specifically focused for now, at least just on duplexes. Because again, for us, we think we do want to expand missing middle citywide eventually because we think that's morally what's right. But again, in terms of taking baby steps, you know, if we can double the capacity of housing, that's an incredible thing. And specifically, if we can provide something that allows all generations to live in a way that statistically we know the majority of them want to us, it's a no-brainer.
It affects the whole economy too. I mean, if you're able to more have reliable childcare in scenarios, your work stability is improved, that's an economic impact.
Well, and yeah, I mean, and talking about equitable cities, I mean, I've experienced this personally. I made the decision years ago, like 7 or 8 years ago, to live in a place of town where I could either bike or take the bus or walk to work. And because of that, partly because of my concerns for the environment, but equally, if not more, because I'm a poor schlub, I was needing to save money. My average cost for gas a month is about $20. Because the only place I drive is to Kroger, and even that, if I would just commit to buying little premieres for my bike, I could. But like that's how we help these communities that are behind in terms of wealth to build wealth. It's not by pushing this big house and a big yard in the suburbs or they have to rely on a car. It's thinking differently and saying, well, you know how you can save money is not spending the $12,000 or so on average that an American spends on cars. Right? Imagine if you had $12,000 more in your pocket, how much you could try to escape poverty, right? So we have to get people away from car dependence and living closer together where they can take transit and bike and walk and build.
Perfect.
So thanks for coming.
What's the next month?
It's next month. I'll send an email. I've got to look up the date, and I'm still finalizing the kind of guests that I'm bringing. So once
You're having a guest.
yeah, I'm gonna have a guest. I'm trying. This is. So next month I'm trying to get Tony back from the parking reform network in Seattle, see if you can help more about parking requirements. And then June, I believe it's June 26th. I'll have to check. We're actually doing a joint COTE event where we are going to do a bus bar crawl. So we're going to be taking the bus to a few different bars on Magnolia, and we'll do that.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much, Justin.
Yeah, thank y'all.
I appreciate you
Okay, awesome. Bye.
guys.